Hello, and welcome to today's HDI webinar. We're excited that you're joining us for Fueling Innovation, Augmenting a New Era of IT Service Management. I'm Andrew Gillum, Associate Analyst at HDI, and I'll be your moderator for today's webcast. Thank you to Bright Pattern for sponsoring today's presentation. I have a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. If you experience any technical problems, please refresh your browser. I encourage you to ask questions at any time during our discussion. Click on the Q&A tab in your BrightTalk window, and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of today's presentation. Today's discussion will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live event. You'll receive an email reminder once it becomes available. You may also download the slides from the Attachments tab. Connect with HDI on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn for news about upcoming events and resources. Join the conversation with other IT service and support professionals at connect.thinkhdi.com. And be sure to check out SpockCast, the single point of contact podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. I'm excited to introduce today's speakers. Chris Chagnon is an ITSM application and web developer who designs, develops, and maintains award-winning experiences for managing and carrying out the ITSM process. Chris has a Master of Science in Information Technology and a bachelor's degree in Visual Communication. In addition, Chris is a PhD candidate studying information systems with a focus on user and service experience. As one of HDI's top 25 thought leaders, Chris speaks nationally about the future of ITSM, practical applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning, gamification, continual service improvement, and customer service and experience. Follow Chris on Twitter at CHAGN0N. That's CHAGN0N. We're also joined by Kevin Smith. With degrees in engineering and computer science, Kevin spent the first 10 years of his career at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, working in mission operations for the Space Shuttle program. Following over 15 years with Avanti and Heat Software assisting global IT organizations, Kevin founded the IT Transformation Institute to advance the world-class ITSM best practices framework and the IT Transformation Roadmap to guide IT organizations and businesses through the critical next decade. Kevin is also the author of The Practical Guide to World-Class IT Service Management, The IT Imperative, and One IT, One Business. And now I'm pleased to turn it over to Chris to kick off our presentation.
Hello. So I'd like to start today by talking about innovation. Innovation is one of those terms that we hear more and more frequently. It's a buzzword for sure. But I want to cover some things today that take us beyond those buzzwords that we see from sales and in reports, and how we can practically apply them to our current enterprise environment. So I think it's really important that we start off with what is innovation and really why should you care about it? So as we think about innovation, it's when you have an idea that fuels a solution and adds value. Thinking about that a little bit more, it's ideas that are novel and useful. When I say things like novel, what I mean is that it's new. A novel idea is something that people haven't necessarily used frequently. When we think about a novel idea, it's something that changes the way that we do things, or it's new to what we're used to. When we think about those companies that use novel ideas, we think of people like Apple or Amazon or Google. They're coming up with ideas, and the moment you see that new thing, you want it. I'm not proposing that we in the IT sector start coming up with these amazing products that people really want, but it's about coming up with software solutions or different things like that that people want to use. Because as we come up with these things and invest that time, it's about making things that people go, oh, that's kind of cool. A big thing here is that it addresses needs and wants. And you'll see here that I have highlighted customer needs. We'll go into it in a little bit about who our users are, who our customers are, but it's really important that when we're addressing needs and wants, that it's from the perspective of those that we're servicing. And then the final thing that innovation is surprising. Nobody looks at an innovative idea and goes, oh yeah, that's cool, it's old. It needs to be surprising. You need to be able to look at that idea and say, yeah, this is definitely something that's very interesting or I didn't expect it to be there. So looking at it as a model for innovation, we have an idea. We have the ability to execute an idea that addresses a need and fits a market while adding value to our company and adding value to our users. Extending that into these 4 focus areas, it's the solution space, the need space, the market space, and that value space. So when looking at a model for innovation, we can say that we have a need, solution, market, and value, and you see that these all feed into each other. So as stated here, the key to innovation is to focus on a need that exists to find a novel solution that there's a new or existing market for where your solution can add value. That does kind of sound really hokey and sounds very structured and out of a book, but when we think about it from our purposes in the IT realm, especially in the services and support or being able to interface with customers, it's talking about needs, solutions in the market, and adding that value. Value as we define it can be lots of different things. It can be efficiencies, cost savings, increased revenues, happiness of our customers. All sorts of different things can be defined when we're talking about value here, but it really comes down to thinking about the needs that we have and then the solutions that we have to address those. So you're probably asking why? Why should I innovate? Everything's on fire all the time. We're busy helping people. We're busy putting out those fires. We're doing what we can when we can, but figuring out why we want to innovate when we're kind of just happy going day to day, it drives change is principally one of those big things. And then it also kind of mixes up that day-to-day work. If you think about some of those famous policies at companies like Google with the 80-20 rule, where 80% of their time is spent doing their day-to-day assigned work, and they give them 20% free time to come up with new ideas. I'm not saying you're necessarily going to come up with 20% of your time to do these different innovative ideas, but at the same time, coming up with things or trying new things is a really great way to learn new things. If you've never worked with APIs, for example, playing around with those and learning the REST API to get a weather thing integrated with your ticketing system or your call center system might be an innovative or novel way to approach things. You might not be the first person to do it, but your integration there taught you how to work with APIs, taught you some new functionality of whatever systems you're using, and it helps to mix up that day-to-day work. In doing that formative work, you're able to then, down the line, start to look at more advanced integrations or different things that you can do. So this basic innovation that you've done right now has driven your ability to add different value down the line. You've learned something along the way, and then the final aspect here is continual process improvement. It's one of those things that we constantly hear. It's reiterated to us that we should be improving our processes, making our services better, constantly adding new value. And innovation and these frameworks mentioned here are a really great way to just start to think about how can I continue to improve processes. We look at the needs that we have and find different solutions for them and figure out how we can continue to add value to that value chain. So that brings us to this next aspect, which is the customer journey. So when we talk about the customer journey or experience journeys or anything like that, we're talking about mapping out how we turn from the framework of transactions, which is, somebody calls us and then we hang up and we do the work, to a longer-term, more experience-based approach. So it's important for us to get some common definitions down when we talk about our customers and our journeys. So from here out, you might hear me say the word customer, but what we're going to broaden that out to use is the word user. So user-focused design. When we talk about what a user is, a user can be anything or anyone that interacts with our design, our system, our experience, or whatever it is that we're doing. So that can be a stakeholder internally to our company. It can be a customer who's external to us. They consume our services. It can be employees. Employee experience matters more than ever in making it so that they are happy doing their work and have the ability to do that work. It can be a manager. So you could be making things easier for them by providing new dashboards or reports or different functionality that they might not have had before. It could also be interesting things like a robot or an animal. If you're designing an experience where something is going to be interfacing and that thing is a robot, whether that's a virtual assistant like Google or Alexa or Siri, or it's an actual robot on an assembly line, you can start to think about those types of integrations for a robot. And the reason I have something like animals here is because if you are a company that makes dog bowls, you need to make a product that works for that dog But you also need to consider that you have two stakeholders or two users there. There's the customer who's going to buy that dog bowl for aesthetics, functionality, but then there's the animal that needs to use it. They might initially buy it because they like it, but they might not become a long-term customer of your brand if the animal doesn't like it as well. So it's important to think that a user can be almost anything. So that's why I say here it's anyone or anything that interacts with what you're building. So when we talk about empathy in the user, an important exercise to get familiar with is what's called empathy mapping. So empathy in this terminology is just putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and being able to identify the problem space from their perspective. This is a really great thing to get under your belt, or an exercise to start asking, because it takes it away from your own biases. If you start looking at things from the perspective of the user, you can say, what will the user be doing? Or what will the user be thinking? Or what will the user be feeling while they use this product? It's really helpful because you're no longer talking about yourself. You know what you know, and you know what your strengths are or what abilities you have. But when we start talking about empathizing with our users, we can say, well, what will Carol in the finance department need from this solution? Conversely, you might have another user on that same thing and say, well, what will Bob from accounts receivable need with the system? And you can start to look at it like that. But sometimes we don't have the ability to look at every single one of our users. We have, hundreds of users, thousands of users, millions of users maybe. So another tool that we can take out when we're thinking about how can we start asking these questions to identify the problems for our users and find those solutions is a tool that's called personas. So a persona is really common in the marketing world, but also in this UX or design world. We use personas to broaden, come up with kind of archetypes for entire groups of people. I work in higher education, so it's really easy for us to come up with some of these persona groups. So we have faculty, we have students, we have graduate students, we have alumni. There's all sorts of different groups that are easy that you can think of as one archetypal thing, which is what a persona ends up being there. It's really great to start thinking about personas because they're basically little resumes that you're creating for functional groups. You can create them for broader categories, like I mentioned there for students, or if you think about the structure of a student, you might have a first-year student versus a senior student. Those people might have very different needs, and it might be good for you to start considering that. When you look at your typical enterprise, you might start saying, we have a persona for somebody who works in Excel all day in finance and is not the most technical user. That might be the type of persona that you come up with and start mapping. That way, when you're asking those questions in the empathy map, what will the user be thinking, feeling, or doing, you can start to figure out exactly what perspective that user is going to have there. And what I have here noted is that they're usually based on field research. You can come up with what's called a proto-persona, which is, a heuristic or a gut feeling, which is okay. That's still better than not doing it. But you can also try and quantify this. This can come from doing surveys or polling and figuring things out. And that helps you make sure that your personas aren't just based off of assumptions. And then again, why are we using these personas? They help us create what are called user stories, which is, a user should be able to do this with whatever solution we're coming up with. And they also help with that understanding of context and help you cater those different solutions to the different personas so that you're not just building solutions that you think IT thinks everyone needs. So taking this the next step, this is building upon what we've already covered. So we started off with the empathy mapping, which is, the very user level. Then we applied that to a more broad category of personas. Now we want to place those personas in motion. So a persona is really helpful, but it doesn't tell us about a specific journey or interaction. That's where experience mapping or journey mapping come into play. So journey mapping is a framework that maps out the stages of your customer lifecycle. What's really great about that is you can think very broad about the entire experience from onboarding to offboarding, or you can think at a specific touch point or feature set. You can use them to document your current system, what's going on with the customers we have now, or you can use it to design a future state. Here's what I would like it to be. By looking at that, you can start to take these systems and map exactly how that might work for your users. So in this case, what we have is the mapping between the user and us is really that journey map that we're caring about here. In between, we have these things called touch points. So a touch point is basically every interaction along this channel or this journey that we have here. So I want to walk through a quick example here while we're talking about journey maps to kind of help us get an idea of where things are with that. So we have a user who really likes what we do. They heard about us on Instagram because we spent a lot of money to get on Instagram. We have really visual ads that are striking, and the user is enthralled with our product. So as you can see, we have this experience map where it's going up. They like our product, and then they tweet about it. You know, bird tweet, that's what this one is. And they say, hey, does anyone know about this? They're getting some social intelligence here. They reached out to their friends group on Twitter or even just random people to say, what's the experience there? They get some responses, which is great. There's some mixed reviews, but it's mostly positive, so it's not quite as good as their original excitement, but it's not bad. It's not a bad experience. It's pretty neutral. So because of that, they've gone to our website. They've gone through our shopping cart experience, which we're using a third-party shopping cart, because who makes their own shopping cart software these days? Once they're in the shopping cart experience, it's starting to get really weird. Our quantities are limited, and they're starting to run into issues. We didn't really set up the software that well because, you know, we focus on our brand and not so much the software implementation. That's not our concern. We then passed them off to a payment processor because, again, PCI compliance is scary, and who would want to have to manage that? So they're using our payment processor, which doesn't use SSL, but trust me, it's probably safe. Anyway, give us your money. To get the product through a shipping carrier, it's super fast, so the experience starts to get better, even though it was going downhill. And then we give them a follow-up phone call just to ask them how their experience was, and they really liked that, you know, experience that we provided them by providing, you know, the follow-up experience for them. So where this starts to get interesting is we can consider where does the customer journey end for our company. We talked about multiple areas that we don't control. We do have an Instagram where we bought ads there. We are on Twitter. They found us there, and they tagged us, and they used some hashtags that we've been using. There's customer discussion, which is, again, outside of our control. We chose the shopping cart platform, but a lot of the bugginess of it might be out of our control. The payment processor, again, is outside of our control, but it's something that happens. And then as we go forward to all these things, you realize that the customer journey involves multiple different vendors, different software, different experiences outside of us, even though we're the people who chose those different integrations there. So the reason I bring this up is because we might not be building every solution ourselves, but it still impacts the customer experience. Just because they had a bad experience with UPS, they're still going to blame our company or something like that. If we chose a specific payment processor and it was really bad for the customer, that's something we might want to reevaluate. If we constantly get customer feedback that the payment process is really tricky, we might be losing out on sales. Things like that start to matter a lot as we consider the entire customer journey. So as we walk through the individual customer journey or the customer journey for different personas, these types of things bubble up. We identify them as opportunities, and we say, how can we mitigate this or address this thing? In the case of things like the shopping cart, I mentioned that it was probably misconfigured, so we might want to go in there and check some settings out and things like that. In other cases where we mentioned the payment processor was kind of shifty, we might need to switch our companies out there. If a lot of people get to that stage and they abandon their cart, we should look at some of those metrics and consider what's going on. So this is just an example of a journey map. You can apply this to almost any interaction you have. The idea is you just start off with what is the first interaction, and you can go backwards. So if we started here with the shopping cart, because that's where we got the feedback, we could say, well, what happened before that? And we realized that they had this communication, then Twitter, then Instagram. And then you can say, what happened after the shopping cart? And that's how you can start to map these different areas out and get a lot of information about that. So I want to move on to enterprise service management, which is another focus area for innovation right now. Enterprise service management allows us to figure out how to apply some of these IT service management or ITIL best practices that we've been learning and consuming for a really long time and start applying them to other areas of our enterprise. So at the most fundamental level, enterprise service management is extending IT service management practices across the enterprise. It allows us to unify service experiences by consolidating. It allows us to expand our knowledge bases, service catalogs, and a lot of other aspects of what we've been doing in IT service management to other groups that don't necessarily have that. You're not going to see someone that says, like, financial service knowledge management, it might not be a product category that exists because it's a smaller niche. But by taking some of these best practices that we've done in IT service management, we can extend them out to these other areas and really help improve the experience for all of our users, but also for those internal users on those teams. And it really is about coalition building and getting all these other teams integrated into one consolidated platform. And then another perk here is that you can integrate or share tools for a more seamless experience. The last thing you want is to have 7 self-service portals across all the different divisions of your enterprise, whereas if you can have one place for everyone to go, that's a much better experience from the get-go. It's also important for us to cover what isn't enterprise service management. So enterprise service management isn't simply just turning on ticketing for another team. It's not just saying we have an email set up and it goes into the tool and everyone's happy. It's also not just routing all emails to a single service desk and overwhelming them. And then finally, it's not just adding hyperlinks to your existing portal to link to other people's portals. It's really about integrating and getting the best experience for everyone. So why do we care about enterprise service management? As an enterprise, we are stronger when we work together. Rather than being a bunch of different silos, we can use the different tooling and knowledge we have to help each other. It's not just about IT being a savior or a champion here. It really does help IT reputation, but at the same time, it's about IT enabling the business units and also learning from what they have. Huge benefits for the users and the employees and everyone who's using these systems when they're consolidated. And it really removes the risk of content sprawl, which is where we have a bunch of different areas where somebody could go. The last thing you want is for somebody to say, where do I fill out this form or where do I get this process? Having one simplified, unified support allows us to do that. And again, just to reiterate it, it really helps us to leverage the tools that we have without needing to buy new ones. You don't need to buy a separate tool for HR. You don't need to buy a separate tool for every division along the way. And it can amount to huge cost savings if you're using similar platforms or integrations. So let's talk about ESM dating in an online world, which is how do you find the right partners to work with? Really good candidates for this are if they use a shared mailbox. People who use shared mailboxes tend to be the people who will benefit quickly from this because they use one inbox and everybody logs in, sets email to a general address like financial@company.com or whatever it is. Those types of groups can benefit by getting into a structured service management tool or any of these groups that have tons of paper forms. And I use paper forms more inclusively to say things like a lot of PDFs that are really just PDFs that people are printing or filling out digitally without a real process or workflow behind them. Speaking of, if they need workflows or approvals or things like that, rather than having them forward an email with a PDF to another person to print and sign and then upload, those types of people can benefit a lot by being enterprise partners. And this all, again, goes back to helping the users and figuring out the processes that we're having here for more consolidation. And then also, it's just important to keep your ears out and listen to feedback about problem areas. If you have, like I said, in higher ed, we have a lot of students. They'll go on social media and complain about a certain department. Don't look at that and say, that department's bad. Think about it and go, this is an opportunity. Those are problems we can solve and we have solved in the IT world. Some really important things as you're going on, thinking about how you can do this. It's a partnership with those other units. It's not you prescribing best practices and saying, I know best. So active listening and empathy are super important here as well. Don't try to dictate their processes to them. You can listen to their processes and offer suggestions. And then focus on existing relationships between IT and business units already. If there are certain groups that are already tightly integrated, they should be those first ones that we get on board. So keeping that momentum going, it's really important, like I say here, to get the good gossip. What that means is make a wow experience. You don't really have a lot of opportunity to have something go terribly wrong. So those times you onboard new groups, it's really important that they like it and that they tell other people. When they're in those division-wide meetings or they're in a leadership meeting, they go, really liking the way this tool's working out, or wow, we got so many tickets done in such amount of time. Word does spread, and this is kind of like Net Promoter Score, if you're familiar with that. People will talk about good or bad things, which is why I say you also need to work your best to reduce friction. If something isn't working for some of those first teams, it's really important to fix it as quickly as you can because you don't want them to just go back and revert to their old processes. So one of the next areas that's really important for us to start focusing on as far as how we can innovate and really change the way that we're working on service management is to change from portals to hubs. When we talk about changing from portals to hubs, a lot of us have finally gotten our portals up and running, and this is the portal portlet model. This is what's very common in the industry and how a lot of us think about it. We have a lot of different features that we've launched. We launched a service catalog, we launched a knowledge base, we might have launched a software library, we might show people their tickets, but they're very separate features and functionality. We might have a home page that launches people to these different points or features of our portal, but more modern or innovative is this hub and spoke model where everything is interconnected. So by moving from the idea of a portal to a hub, you're allowing yourself to have much more integrated features and no dead ends. So to give a better context of this is somebody might go to your portal and they might be looking for information about a piece of software. They might start in the service catalog because that's what feels right. They want to request the VPN. But because you have a service catalog entry about the VPN, you might want to link back to your software library, which has information about the specific piece of software needed for the VPN. That might also interlink to several knowledge articles that people have there about installing it yourself or downloading that, and you want to give them the opportunity to enter that ticket right away. So having them request it if they can't self-install or they're having an issue with that helps them link back. Conversely, if they already had a ticket about this, they could then link back to these knowledge articles and start thinking about how everything is interrelated in the hub and spoke model. That means when I say no dead ends, it means they can constantly click. It's the Wikipedia effect. It's where you always have one more link to click if you want to. That allows people to have full access to information without having to know where they need to go to get down the right pathway. The last thing you want is for somebody to go very far down a certain pathway and feel stuck, and then they're just going to open more and more tickets. So what should you put in your portal? The biggest answer is anything you don't mind sharing publicly, and I say yes, really. So the idea is as long as there's no information security, personally identifiable information, or other issues with the data, it really can't hurt to put it there. So that includes things like software catalogs, configuration management database, assets, maps, anything like that. If it can help the users is helpful. An example I'll give you is you saw in the last slides that I say location data. We track a lot of different technology-enhanced locations, rooms with projectors, different computers, things like that. So we published that out. We said it can't hurt. Let's have people see what's in the rooms. That means we end up having faculty members who can see what rooms they'll be teaching in, what technology is in there to prepare for how they're going to be teaching. What's nice about that is they can look that up without having to ask us. They feel more confident in their teaching and they can plan around the technology without needing to be surprised on day one. With that in mind, I do caution signals to noise. Make sure that it's good information. You don't want to have a location database that just has 100 entries of to be determined or 100 entries that just says computer. You want to make sure that there is good information and that it does help users if they do find that information. You also want to use smart strategies for indexing or searching that enable people to find the right information. If the primary mode of information gathering is in knowledge articles, you want to make sure that you find a way to get that stuff to float to the top. Whereas you don't necessarily want them to be inundated or bombarded with tons of information they might not want access to. Giving them options to find that information is great, but you just want to be careful of that as a little precaution. So the final thing here is really delighting your users with those experiences. So by delighting your users, I mean make your users happy and want to use it. So what I say here is if you build it, they will come. If you build it poorly, they will come and leave and go back to whatever else is easiest, whether that's calling you, entering tickets, or things like that, and they'll probably never use it again. You don't get a lot of second chances. An example that I always love to give is we have a knowledge article that is how to find your host name on your computer. Because everybody is on our network or on our domain, we actually have that information either in the asset management or we can do a DNS lookup. So we built a feature that if you look up the host name while you're on the network, it shows you your host name. Simple things like that you can do to enable it, and that just helps the users be happy. They can still learn how to find their host name of their computer, but you can show them that information pretty quickly. There's a lot of areas where you can think about that, and it's just providing that little extra information or something that's happy. I have a little joke here that confetti always helps, but it's making a page happy or exciting or a little bit fun really does help out. Keep all of your information light but accurate. It's easy to get very technical and very in the weeds. We find that splitting out by audience, so we have a general article, which is how to get on the Wi-Fi, and then there's some advanced troubleshooting steps, which are separate. What's nice about that type of thing is the average user gets what they need without being weighed down by all of the ifs and buts and everything like that. And you're able to help address all sorts of different audiences there. So making your portal into a true hub really does mean that all roads lead back to Rome, as it says here. What that means is every single one of the different applications you have should be linked back to your hub. Whether that's a SaaS tool, an SSO, sign-in app, or things like that, whatever those things are, try and link them back centrally and make it a real hub. Make people start at your hub and then go out to the other places. Integrate where you can and make it so that whenever somebody says, where can I find or how do I get to, the answer should just be start with your portal or your hub. If they have that, they'll start to be able to find everything on their own. They don't need to know where to go to find what they need. And that brings us to omnichannel experiences, which is really thinking about how we can best provide all of our services that we currently offer across all sorts of different environments without worrying too much. So I don't want to get too much into the terminology and definitions, but when we talked about journey mapping, we were talking about touch points regardless of their channel. But each of those touch points, we mentioned things like Instagram or Twitter. Those theoretically are different channels that we're using for those leads or those contacts. So there's a few different other definitions here. So we have bidirectional channels, which are two-way interactions. Then there's unidirectional channels, which are one-way communication. So if you think about something like an emergency alert system, that's a one-way communication. You send out an alert, people can't really respond to it. Two-way communication is a lot of other systems we have out there. Telephone, email, social media, all sorts of different things we have allow that. We have physical channels, which is face-to-face, or telephones technically count as physical. And then there's digital channels such as websites, apps, text, social media, email. And those methodologies are slightly different, and they have their own nuances to them. But as we consider all the different channels that we have, it's important to start thinking about how we can support them. So when we think about the different channels we have, a single channel is a very common one. A customer can call your organization, they can get to a support desk or customer service or whatever that is. Multi-channel is they can call or they can email, but you have maybe different support desks. If they call, they get one group. If they email, they get a different group. When we start to think about what omni-channel really means is you have one unified support structure. You can still have multiple groups, different teams that answer different things, but it's a single strategy about how to address things. The reason to bring up the omni-channel goal is because historically a lot of these multi-channel with multiple support strategies, customers get different experiences and learn which one is best. They might learn that the online chat is outsourced and they don't really get the support, or that those people don't have the ability or they're not empowered to provide support. So the online chat might just be there as a sounding board. You're paying people to say, yes, I'm sorry that happened to you. But as you move on, they might learn that the phone is where you really get the good customer care or the customer support. In an omni-channel strategy, you think about how can I centralize this and provide the same support using the different channels that I have. One of those channels might even be through your portal. So you set your portal or your hub as your gold standard, and then everything else can almost flow from there. In doing so, you're consolidating practices, removing your amount of training you need to do, and also empowering your staff to give the appropriate answers and responses. The last thing you want is to have a team that feels like they can't solve issues, that always has to escalate to another team, even though it's really just an artificial barrier you put in place. So how can you get to omnichannel? The best piece of advice I have on getting to omnichannel is to think about which channels you can reasonably support with your resources, knowledge, and limitations. It's important that you remember that customers won't know where to go, but also that customers shouldn't need to know where to go. And it's about changing it to an experience versus that transaction. So when you think about getting to omnichannel, you'll see here I have examples like Pinterest. Should your brand be on Pinterest? Are customers contacting you there? Are customers posting about you there? That might be a consideration for you to go there. But it's also really important that when you're considering new channels that you're adding value in those channels. see a very common example here that there's a big monolithic cable company, and this is what you definitely do not want to do because it is not omni-channel. A lot of times you'll tweet at your cable company, my internet's out again, I'm so mad. And they go, thank you for tweeting it. Please contact our support desk. That's not omni-channel support. In fact, you're probably going to make your customers more upset than usual with that. So it's really important to start thinking, are we using this channel? Can I address issues through this? Are my technicians there? Rather than a social media manager who's just forwarding people onto the service desk, you really want to think about what value that channel adds. So I also caution against adopting a channel because it's trendy without having a strategy for it, forgetting that you've launched that channel, not understanding how to use it properly, or to pander. It's really common to hear about the next big thing. TikTok is a big one right now, and a lot of brands are getting on there. But what you want to try to avoid is that hello, fellow kids type mentality where you're going to a new environment and not understanding how to use it. It can be embarrassing or hurt the brand reputation, or it can end up being really awkward as you misuse a platform or give information you might not have wanted to, or have different data leaks or things like that. So making sure you understand how to use a platform is very important, but you also want to have a strategy for what that support looks like, and that's really what this omnichannel idea is about here. All right, so to review the session, we talked about innovation, which is that focus on a need that exists to find a solution for an existing or a new market where you can add value. The customer journey matters because customers experience a journey with you and not an individual transaction. As much as you might think that one email or phone call is the end of everything, there's a lot more, and that's part of a longer reputation or story or narrative the customer has in their mind about you, your company, your brand, or your support. Enterprise service management will really help with experiences and provide opportunities to fuel innovation within your company, because you're pushing the boundaries of what you can do, what you are supporting, and also learning from other groups. You might have the opportunity there to learn how another group processes something that might change how your workflows work. Moving from portals to hubs helps us make sense of all these changes in context of the user experience as we start to think, well, if I have a centralized hub and it has all these different departments in it, I should figure out how to properly integrate them and how I store all that data. And then finally, considering omnichannel experiences helps make it all flow together. You don't want to try and have disparate experiences for your end users, for your employees, or any of your customers or stakeholders where you can, because having it all unified will help in the end to make everything, like I said, flow together. And with that, I am ready to pass off to Kevin.
Hey, thank you, Chris. That was a great treatment on some really important topics. And what I want to do is just take a few minutes to explore a couple of them a little more closely. And I want to take a look at ESM, for example, and how we really advance the practice of ESM, because it's so important. The delivery of services is important to every person in the organization. And we traditionally think of that as IT. And it was certainly an important part of the history of IT because that's where the help desk and the service desk grew up. But we found that so many people in the organization had an appetite for and a critical need for services and improving the services that they request and the services that are delivered to them. And that was part of the genesis of enterprise service management, is just service delivery for everybody. And so I just have a few tips to get people to think about how we make ESM better, how we do ESM better, how we bring better services to everybody. And the first one is just around automation. And Chris, I know you touched on this. I want to push on that a little bit more, in that because I often get asked, well, yeah, we understand it's important to automate, but give us some numbers. How do we quantify that? And so I published a business rule that I call the 90-90 rule in my book called the IT Imperative, and it calls for us to automate 90% of service delivery by the year 2025. I think we say here ITSM, that is true for IT, but it's also true for ESM. So let me say that again. We need to automate 90% of what we do by the year 2025. And the reason we have to automate, this is not just an arbitrary benchmark. It's not an arbitrary goal. The reason we have to automate is because it's the only way we can scale. It's the only way that we can operate around the clock, and more businesses are expected to operate 24/7. And that then creates pressure on IT and an expectation on ESM, on all of the business, to be effective around the clock. It's what customers demand. It's what customers expect. We can only be agile if we automate. And yes, we have a lot of work to do here because we're probably at 20 to 30% today. When I'm working with an ESM team or an ITSM team, I always ask them how automated they are because it's very telling in a lot of ways. So we have some work to do, but we have time, and the tools have gotten a lot better. So keep that in mind. I would love to hear from you. I'll give you my contact information at the end. You want to question that some more, you have lessons learned, that would be fantastic. But I will tell you that the very best ESM teams globally, and there are teams everywhere focusing on this, are very much prioritizing automation and how we can get to that 90% plus level in many cases. The second tip I want to share, went too far. The second tip I want to share is around AI. Boy, we love to talk about AI, artificial intelligence. Chris mentioned innovation, and some of the biggest innovation breakthroughs are coming around AI. We've been talking about AI for 20 or 25 years, but it's just really become helpful. It was probably overhyped for a long time, but now it truly is valuable. It truly can change how we work. For example, creating a seamless human and AI integration, a seamless experience. We now have natural language processing. Agents can get assisted by AI responses. We have rapid access to enormous amounts of information that can really improve how we perform. And remember, the key here is not AI for the sake of AI, just like it was not automate for the sake of automating. It is to make us work better, to make the user and the customer have a better experience. How do we deliver a better service? And some of us are familiar with bots. Bots can be very helpful. They're still young. They're still developmental. But just think of a bot that's 1,000 times more capable than what bots are today. Well, that starts to be very interesting. And that's the kind of curve that AI is on. It will advance by a factor of 100, by a factor of 1,000 in just the next 5 or 6 years. And that makes it very exciting. So when you're looking at the future of ESM, there are lots of things we have to think about, but there are only a few things that are going to be pillars in what we do in ESM, and one of those pillars is going to be AI. Usable AI that's very practical and gives the ESM, the service provider, a great experience and gives the user or the customer a great experience. The third tip is just a wonderful topic around self-service. And in this crazy world of COVID, self-service has become even more important. I would have said a year ago that self-service was critical to ESM. It was one of the foundational elements that helped us to create ESM. And the thing is that everybody likes self-service. Everybody loves self-service because when you do it well, it's transformational. And it's one of those things where you get a better experience as a user. The organization providing the service is able to save money. And the user is able to learn. The user is able to be independent. The user is able to help themselves. The user is able to do something as easily at midnight as they are at noon. And that's something that everybody likes. Everybody likes independence. Everybody likes flexibility. Everybody likes being able to help themselves on their own schedule. And it's a fundamental part of ESM. Every ESM model should include self-service. And when we can do that with omnichannel, and self-service can be fully automated, it can be the option of a human if we need it. It would not be the normal case, but it's always great to have that option of voice-to-voice interaction if we need it. It could be chat, it could be SMS and text, it could be social. Leveraging all those channels is a natural enhancement to self-service. And I mentioned this crazy, we could take on the topic of how our lifestyle is changing. That could be a whole 1-hour webinar unto itself. But our lifestyle is changing and our personal life is colliding with our professional life. And self-service is a natural for that because we can get work done whenever we need to, wherever we might be. And now with this remote workforce that we're all living within, this new model, it could be a long time. This could be the new normal. Self-service helps us do that, helps us live a better lifestyle, helps us embrace easy and convenient. Well, the tip number 4 is a natural extension to that too, because it's about mobility. And omnichannel technologies are natural for mobility. The mobile lifestyle, working on a mobile device, that was the exception just 4 or 5 years ago. The mobile device has always been a headache for IT, but we've learned to embrace it because it's just part of our life today. And much of what's happened as we have moved to become a remote workforce, and most of us are part of that remote workforce, we are increasingly doing our job on a mobile device. We're doing our job on a smartphone. We're doing our job on a tablet. And in many cases, we just didn't do that before. The smartphone was kind of the domain of our personal life. Well, that's just not the case anymore, and that's not going to change. And so omnichannel is a natural for that, where traditional service models just can't keep up because of scalability or the expectations of service delivery. And ITSM is a natural for every organization in the business, and tailoring the needs of that service model to the user and what the user expects and what the user needs. And omnichannel just gives us so much more flexibility. Simple traditional voice is just not enough. And when you add SMS and chat and social into the mix, well, people are used to that. They get that. That's natural, and everybody loves that model. Tip number 5 is about monitoring 100% of interactions. This is an awesome idea. It simply wasn't possible in the past because we didn't have the technology to do it, but now we do. And there's remarkable lessons to be learned. There's remarkable insights that are held in every interaction, every customer interaction. And we now have technology. BrightPattern offers this technology to evaluate the quality of an interaction, to evaluate the sentiment of a customer or a user, and to immediately understand that and take action on it. And the great thing there is customer frustration never gets better with time. It only gets worse. And being able to immediately evaluate an interaction, to take the key lessons from it, and to immediately take action on that, and immediately being minutes, is a real breakthrough. It can fundamentally change the game and ensure that we are making those customers happy, and even when there is a challenge, that we can address it immediately. The final tip I wanted to mention was just take a platform approach. This is important. We could make this comment to everything that we do in IT, and we can certainly make this comment regarding ITSM, is build systems for the future. Build systems at scale. Build systems that are reliable. Build systems that are agile. And build systems that when you need to make a change to them, that can be done very quickly. And this has a lot to do with the technology, but it has a lot to do even more so with value and the total cost of ownership, because the more effective the platform is, the more reasonable our total cost of ownership is, the easier it is to live with that system to 10 or 15 years. We all hate ripping systems out after 4 or 5 years, and we want to avoid that, and we really want to start to pay attention to the value that's inherent in the platform. And BrightPattern working, for example, seamlessly with your existing ITSM solution or your CRM system, your ERP system, whatever the case may be, this then becomes the driver and facilitator for very, very effective ESM. So don't underestimate the platform. I know Chris touched on that. There's always underlying technology. It can't be about that for the user, but the right technology enables the user to have a great experience, enables the user to be happy. So all of this, of course, is about delivering a great experience to real customers, to real users. And I wanted to share one success story with you, a wonderful company some of you might be familiar with in Randstad. They're a market leader in HR recruitment and resource management, and they've been leveraging BrightPattern solutions and omnichannel solutions now for a while, and their focus was really to enhance the automation capabilities of an existing service management solution. We started our discussion, Chris touched on it, I touched on it, and how important it is to automate. Normally when we are automating, we are also innovating. So it is really important. It brings us that scale. It brings us that agility. Randstad is a very, very innovative company. They have a fantastic product. They have a fantastic service. They have a fantastic team of people, and they recognize that. And they've been leveraging Bright Pattern to that regard, and have really been very successful in automating much of what they do, including automating routing with AI voice biometrics, which is a fantastic model. User authentication and user entitlements is really important in this world of the security challenges that we have, and in automating that process and using AI to help us authenticate users and ensure they have the right entitlements is really, really powerful. And just continuing to expand the use of AI. It's built into the platform, it's built into the applications, and Bright Pattern and Randstad was able to recognize that was a great fit for what they want to do now and into the future. And they've been able to achieve some significant results. Return on investment is important to all of us, and Randstad realized a very compelling ROI in just a few months. That's way beyond the standard of the market. Often in the market we talk in terms of years for an ROI. They realized an ROI in just a few months, and a lot of that was due to their team, just the style of their team, the teamwork that they have across their business. It's also a cloud-based solution, and that's a natural for the mobile workforce, for the remote workforce, and for what the model we're likely to be working in the future. Jessica Osborne is one of their leaders and advocates in the business there, and this is just a comment that she made about they've really started doing things smarter in everything that they do in terms of people and in terms of technology, and they were able to do that in partnering with Bright Pattern, and we just wanted to touch on that today. We'd love to tell you more about that, but it's one great example of just what's possible. So my contact information is on here. You can send me an email anytime. I'd love to hear from you. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin J. Smith 4IT. And I often make comments on stuff like this and have really enjoyed you joining us. And with that, that concludes my formal comments, and I'm going to turn it back to Andrew now.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So we had a couple audience questions, and by the way, if you're in the audience, you can still submit those. Click on the Q&A tab on your Bright Talk screen. We'll get to as many of these as we can. Kevin, the one question that came up when you were speaking about automation and that big target for automating 90% of your workload, what exactly are you meaning or seeing people automate? Is it the process or procedures, work instructions, activities? Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think it's important that teams look at just the volume of work, and it can be a task, so it can be a simple task, it could be an activity, it could be a business process, where a business process is sort of a defined sequence of tasks. And look at where the volume is. And there are often tasks or business processes that we perform all the time. They're very well defined, they're very predictable, but they take a lot of people's time. And in many cases, they're done manually. So it could be something like a password reset. Great example, because that's, for many service management teams, that's 30% of the work that they do. That can be very effectively automated. So that's one example, but overall, every organization is a little bit different, so look at the amount of work that's done, the amount of time that's spent on high-volume tasks or business processes that are well-defined. That activity can be automated and really offload the team. So that's a great place to start. Start with the items that are high-volume. They happen all the time. They're very well-defined, and the automation tools that we have available today can probably be very successful in automating that for your team.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Chris, I have a question from the audience for you. Do you use personas, or can you use the empathy map and personas that you spoke about for managing your demand and planning, workforce planning, and kind of gearing up for an operation that's in the future?
Using empathy mapping and personas is really important in the ideation stage. You might not necessarily be able to make a direct translation between a specific persona and the demands that we'll have, but as you're using that persona to develop out the roadmap or the backlog of user stories or different features you're going to need to implement as you're building something out. So let's say you're extending your portal to have some of the new functionality we talked about because you're inspired and want to be innovative today. You could start to say, well, because we need to address the needs of our finance persona as well as our student persona, we have the following features that really need to be built. You can then prioritize those things and say, if we want to do all of these features, it's going to be an estimated amount of time. If we want to do all of the features we've come up with, it's going to be this amount of time. So as far as doing a project-based, whether that's agile or waterfall demand management, that makes sense. But if you want to talk about your day-to-day forecasting for what's coming into a service desk or things like that, personas can be helpful, and you could actually have that as an attribute on a persona, is how often do they use your resources? Does the person in finance tend to use self-help versus calling? Because we all could probably quantify that based on department or things like that. Those are definitely things that you could put in there. But as far as making a KPI based off of personas, that does get a little iffy.
Thanks, Chris. Kevin, automation can be a scary idea. It's a big goal to automate 90% of your process. If you're just getting started in this, where is a good place to begin?
So a great place to begin, and this could be, again, I know some of you are focused on IT with ITSM, some of you are ESM, starting to look at ESM. A great, and I touched on this briefly, but a great place to start is with self-service or service catalog. And I mentioned those two things because they're a little bit different. They have similar DNA, but they're both really effective models for automating the interactions with users and customers. And generally what they do is self-service leans more toward a traditional incident, service catalog leans more toward a service request. But what it does is it offloads the desk from the traditional phone call or phone interaction, and it provides this independence that users love. So really start by looking at self-service if you're not doing it today, or service catalog, and using those vehicles to automate your common requests, your common needs. The top 10, and I always caution people to not take on too much. People get excited about service catalog and they try to put 100 requests into service catalog in the first phase. It's often just too much. So start with 10 or 15 of your most common requests. It could be something as simple as, what is my current vacation time that I've accrued? What is the company's maternity leave policy? What are my current health benefits? Common requests, and that would be a great example for where Service Catalog could help. And automate that and make that Service Catalog available on a mobile device, and that's an amazing model. It really is, and can offload the desk, make everybody happy, allow people to focus on other things like what Chris talked about in the beginning with innovation. Long answer to a simple question, but start by looking at self-service and service catalog, and you'll never regret an investment you make in those areas.
I have a follow-up question to that. We only have about a minute left here, but maybe you can give us some insight. When you start with those top 10 or 15 things that you recommended for your service catalog, for instance, how do you handle things that aren't in those top 10 to 15 without convincing customers that the service catalog doesn't meet their needs? How do you retain that buy-in?
Yeah, that's a tough request, asking me to answer a question in 57 seconds, but I'll try. You can have anything else. You can have an unstructured request, or you can have a request that is not a specific template, but it can be anything where you just allow Service Catalog to take a question, and then you route that question to the right resource and get it answered. And ideally, these request templates are structured and they're targeted at these high-volume questions or requests, but you can also just take on anything, just a walk-on request with a very simple form, and then it goes to the right team and they get an answer put together and try to get an answer back in the same day. I really encourage companies to think in terms of the same-day model because that's good for everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you to everyone in the audience who joined us and participated in today's discussion. I'd also like to thank Chris and Kevin for presenting, and thank you to Bright Pattern for sponsoring today's webinar. This webcast is copyright 2020 by Informatech. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content. Individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Have a great day. I hope you'll join us again soon for another great discussion.